Hello and welcome to video lecture series in political science. Today we are going to discuss chapter 2 titled as Freedom from your 11th class textbook titled as Political Theory. We will divide this chapter into 4 parts. In these 4 parts we will discuss about what is meant by freedom. How do political theorists define freedom? We will also discuss why do we need rules and regulations in society. We will discuss about what is positive and negative liberty and what is meant by freedom of expression. So, let us begin. Today, we will begin by understanding what is meant by freedom or define the concept of freedom, and we will take some examples of prominent personalities. Now, this chapter is titled as Freedom. You might have come across the word freedom many times in your daily lives. One area where we often hear about or learn about freedom is the freedom struggle or struggle for freedom. What do we mean by this freedom? If you look at history, history is full of examples where people, communities, groups and nations have been dominated, they have been exploited, enslaved or controlled by dominant groups in society. Like India was colonized by the British for more than 100 or 150 years. They curtailed our freedom. In such cases, we also have examples of heroic struggle put forward by some people against this domination or subjugation. Now, what is this freedom for which people are willing to sacrifice everything? Everything means even their lives. There are inspiring stories regarding the struggle for freedom. Freedom represents the desire of people to control their lives and destinies. Freedom is about having opportunity to express oneself freely. What do we mean by that? That is without any fear, constraint through one's choices and activities. That is, I decide about my own life. Now let us take few examples of heroic struggles for freedom from our history. You are familiar with the name of Nelson Mandela. He is popularly known as Madiba. Nelson Mandela was a South African anti-apartheid revolutionary, a politician who served as President of South Africa from 1994 to 1999. Now, Nelson Mandela, while being in prison, negotiated with the South African government, the white government, and he fought for free elections in South Africa. Mandela was inspired by Gandhi, and he fought for peaceful transition to democracy in South Africa, and he achieved it also. He led the way to international reconciliation, and he started the long process of building social justice in South Africa. His autobiography is titled as Long Walk to Freedom. In his autobiography, Mandela talks about his personal struggles against the apartheid rule in South Africa. He talks about the resistance of his people, the segregation policy of the white regime, and also about the hardships, humiliation and police brutality suffered by the black people in South Africa. Now, what made Nelson Mandela a hero, an inspiration, an idol, an icon? This was his inspirational leadership, his willingness to fight against injustice and racism or apartheid wherever he met it in his society. Mandela refused to bow down in front of pressure or accept any injustice to keep himself out of prison, which means he laid down his own life or he bore hardships in order to struggle for the freedom of his own people. Mandela's flexibility. What do we mean by this? His approach and ability to communicate with the oppressive government non-violently. He did not pressurize them, but he used silent, non-violent ways of communicating to them. Mandela had always kept the cause of justice and freedom from oppression before his own safety. And all these abilities together made him a hero, an icon in South Africa and world over. Another inspiring story is of Aung San Suu Kyi. She is from Burma. She is daughter of the legendary liberation movement leader Aung San from Burma. After studying abroad, Suu Kyi returned home in 1998. And she finds a widespread slaughter of protesters rallying against the brutal rule of dictator Ne Win in Burmese society. Now, what Suu Kyi did? She spoke out against him, Ne Win, and initiated a non-violent movement for achieving democracy and human rights in Burma. She was one of the founders of National League for Democracy, popularly called as NLD party, and she was elected General Secretary of this party. Again, inspired by Gandhi, Suu Kyi opposed all use of violence and called on the military leaders to hand over power to the civilian government peacefully. Her aim was to establish a democratic society in which countries' ethnic groups can cooperate in harmony and live peacefully with each other. In 1990, the NLD had a clear-cut victory in the elections, but the army generals prevented the Legislative Assembly to convene or come together or take over the rule. They continued to arrest members of the opposition and refused to release Suu Kyi from the house arrest. And we will be surprised to know she remained under the house arrest in Burma for almost 15 of the 21 years she was given, since 1989 until 2010 when she was released. And her ongoing efforts for non-violent struggle for democracy and human rights won her the coveted Nobel Prize for Peace in 1991. In her book of essays titled as Freedom from Fear, Suu Kyi says, "For me, real freedom is freedom from fear. And unless you can live free from your fear, you cannot live a dignified human life." Now, these are deep thoughts that provoke deep thinking. In other words, what Suu Kyi is suggesting, she is saying that we must not be afraid of the opinion of the other people, or of the attitude of authority, or reaction of the members of other people to the things that we want to do, or we should not be afraid of the ridicule of our peers or of speaking our mind. Yet we find that people often exhibit such fear in society. For a dignified life or living with dignity, we need to overcome such fears, all the fears which we have discussed so far. Apart from these freedom fighters, you might be familiar with the life and struggle of Mahatma Gandhi in India. Let us discuss how Gandhiji discussed idea of freedom in his famous work called as Hind Swaraj, written in 1909. In Indian political thought, concept of Swaraj is similar to freedom. The term Swaraj is combination of two terms or two words. The first is Swa, means self, and the second part is Raj, means rule. And Swaraj can be understood or interpreted in two different ways. First is, it is the rule of the self, that is, we govern ourselves. And the second interpretation is the rule over the self, that is, you control yourself or your personality. It can mean self-governance or self-rule, and it was used synonymous with home rule by Mahatma Gandhi when he wrote the book Hind Swaraj during 1909. In Gandhiji's work, it refers to, or Swaraj refers to, the concept for India's independence from the foreign domination or the British Raj. Swaraj in the context of freedom struggle in India referred to freedom as a constitutional and political demand and as a value at the social collective level. Fighting for Swaraj was the central theme of freedom movement for which Gandhi fought. It gets reflected in the inspiring and famous statement by Tilak, that is, Swaraj is my birthright and I shall have it, which is translated in Hindi as Swaraj mera janmasiddh adhikar hai aur main ise paakar rahunga. It is the understanding of Swaraj as rule over the self that was highlighted by Mahatma Gandhi in his work Hind Swaraj, where he states that, and I quote, "It is a Swaraj when we learn to rule ourselves." Swaraj is not just freedom, but liberation in redeeming one's self-respect, self-responsibility and capacities for self-realization from the institutions of dehumanization. Understanding the real self and its relation with other people and communities belonging to different caste, religion, language and color in society is critical or significant to the project of attaining Swaraj. Unless you live in harmony in multicultural societies, you cannot live a proper Swaraj kind of life or the dream that Gandhiji has dreamt of. Gandhiji believed the development that follows would liberate both individual and collective potentialities guided by the principle of justice, which is again a fundamental human value. It is not surprising that this philosophy of Swaraj is relevant still today, in fact more than the time when it was written in 1909. But what is this freedom that these people fought for or stood for in history or in present? Why so many people sacrifice their lives for freedom without even thinking for a while that they are laying down their lives? Let's understand the concept of freedom. Dictionary meaning of freedom is that it is the state of being free or at liberty rather than in confinement or under physical restraint. Simply stating, freedom is absence of external constraints. An individual is said to be free if he or she is not subject to external controls or coercion. Coercion means force. When he or she is able to take decisions by himself or herself independently and act in an autonomous way, that is, decides about himself or herself. Every individual, community, society, group or nation cherishes freedom, or they value their independence. They wish to protect their culture and their future along with their freedom. Now, along with absence of constraints, freedom has another important dimension. There is one more significant dimension in which we can interpret freedom. Freedom is also about expanding the ability of people to freely express themselves and develop their potential to achieve certain goals which they have determined for themselves. Freedom in this respect is a condition in which people can develop their creativity and enhance their capabilities. A society is said to be free if it enables its members to develop their capacities and potential without any restraint or social constraint. But is it possible to imagine a situation where there are no constraints? What will happen if people with their respective interest and goals act without any restraint or constraint in society? There will be chaos, conflict, frictions and fight between people. The modern day complex societies, which are multicultural and diverse societies, people have wide variety of interest, ambitions and goal. And if everyone tries to achieve his or her goal without regarding the existence of the other, there will be utter chaos in society or disorder. Now, how do we avoid this disorder or chaos then? Thus, given the range of interest and ambitions of people in any social organization, no matter how small or big that social organization is, in order to guarantee freedom to people, some form of rules and regulations are required. These rules may require some form of limitation, restriction or constraint upon the action of the individual. But if actions go unchecked, they may harm others. These rules and regulations or laws imposed upon the so-called freedom of the individual to act according to his own choice also free us from the insecurity that may come as a result of everyone's free choice. If everyone acts according to his choice, there will be chaos, there will be disorder. So, in order to remove that disorder, people need some form of regulations. Political theorists debate about freedom and they try to evolve principles through which we can differentiate between socially necessary constraints, rules or regulations and actions that actually curtail our freedom. They also discuss how social and economic structures limit freedom of individuals. Let's summarize what we discussed in this lecture class to conclude. We have begun this chapter by discussing what do we mean by freedom. We have discussed what is freedom and briefly about prominent personalities from history and present who fought for freedom tirelessly, namely Nelson Mandela, Suu Kyi and Mahatma Gandhi. In the next part of this chapter, we will discuss about what freedom means and how it is understood by political theorists. Till then, you can enjoy reading this part of the chapter. Thank you.